Chapter 3. The air was heavy that night. Not from weather, Florida's heat I could handle, but from knowing. That kind of knowing that doesn't just fill your lungs, it changes your DNA. You stop being a man who was wronged, and become the evidence of the wrong itself. My body wasn't healing fast enough to run, but my mind sprinted ahead of their lies like it had nothing to lose. Because it didn't. From that point forward, I stopped playing by the script. No more waiting for callbacks. No more submitting to review panels stacked with the same people who shared coffee with my opposition. No more trusting people with titles. I built a list of every person who had touched my case. Not just names, roles, relationships, timeline placements. Who recused themselves and why. Who filed motions and when. Who suddenly changed firms, stepped down, resigned. I cross-referenced it with other suppressed cases. The overlaps? Chilling. 4 names kept showing up like fingerprints on a broken lock. One of them had sat on my ethics review. Another had been quoted in my insurance settlement denial. Another had published an article about ethical limitations on post-judgment transparency. Another? He'd gone completely dark. No trace. I printed everything. Put it in a locked binder I kept in a dead storage unit rented under a name that didn't exist. The kind of place where no one asks questions. Where lost things stay forgotten. Except I didn't want to forget. I wanted the opposite. The truth wants light. But first, it needs a fuse. So I started writing. Not legal letters. Not grievances. Stories. Fables. Threads. Creative non-fiction cloaked in metaphor. I posted online in places people go when their own systems collapse, when they lose faith in courts and commissions and start looking for others in the dark. And that's when the messages started to multiply. Anonymous. Encrypted. Some were fragments. Others whole paragraphs of experience that read like mine: lost files, disappeared hearings, ghosted attorneys, rulings made without appearances. We weren't anomalies. We were a class. Unofficial. Unseen. Unrecorded. But real. And getting louder. One message said, they track behavior patterns. If you don't accept the initial mediation, you get reclassified as non-compliant. That triggers a delay script. You've seen it too, right? Another said, I filed 3 complaints. Each one received. None reviewed. When I pressed, the office sent me a packet on mental health resources. Another wrote, they didn't deny my complaint, they edited it, then said I'd misrepresented myself. Each one like a mirror. Each one proof I wasn't crazy. Each one evidence that my war wasn't personal, it was systemic. I'd stopped asking the question, why me? Now I asked, how many of us? That's when I created the Ghost Table. It wasn't a database. It was a digital altar. Each entry had a code name. Each story summarized and time-stamped. All of it backed up and distributed to encrypted nodes across the country. Every time a new message came in, I added a row. Not because I thought justice would come, but because I wanted memory to persist. The system feared records. So I became one. By the time I finished logging the 20th ghost, I knew I was too far gone to walk away. But finally, I wasn't walking alone. Chapter 4. I wasn't trying to be a hero. Heroes die in these systems. They become cautionary tales. Footnotes. People talked about in past tense, he tried so hard. She fought for the truth. They were really onto something, until. No. I wasn't interested in martyrdom. I was interested in persistence. In traceability. In becoming the error message their system couldn't debug. The Ghost Table grew. And with it, so did the attention. The whispers in messages got longer, more precise. One day, someone sent me internal policy documents, not public, not leaked elsewhere. It outlined an informal classification tool, PRC 37. Pattern risk classification. Tier 3. Language like, high vocal persistence, unlikely to accept mediation, exhibits systemic distrust, may attract outside attention, recommends strategic de-escalation and silent closure. There it was. They had a language for us. And I had a name for them. The architects. Not the visible lawyers, not the state boards. The ones behind the forms. The drafters of procedure. The designers of fail rates. They built the maze I kept slamming into, and they counted on me blaming the walls. But I wasn't doing that anymore. I was reading blueprints. The PRC-37 doc came with a flowchart. Red lines. Dead ends. Advisory silence protocols for dealing with persistence profiles. Their fear wasn't of the facts. It was of momentum. Of story. Of resonance. That's what I had now. Not credibility, they'd buried that. But connectivity. Every message. Every ping. Every new ghost added to the table made me less of a complaint and more of a collective. That's when I realized, I wasn't trying to win my case anymore. I was trying to build something no system could outlast. A record made of noise. Memory encoded in resistance. A narrative that refused to be reformatted. I started publishing fragments of the ghost table. Not names. Not full cases. Just data points. Patterns. Metrics. A chart showing how long it took ethics boards to respond when a complainant had legal counsel versus when they didn't. A graph showing how often insufficient evidence was used as justification without clear investigation markers. I made it look clinical, impersonal, because people dismiss emotion but pause for numbers. And then something I hadn't expected happened. One of them reached out. Not a ghost. Not a survivor. An insider. He didn't name himself. Didn't need to. His message was short. You're close. They know it. PRC-37 wasn't created for justice, it was created for containment. Keep your backups safe. Trust no one who offers help without risk. I reread the message 10 times. Someone on the inside saw the system for what it was and didn't want it to survive untouched. That terrified me. Because if someone in the machine was rattled enough to speak, then what I had must have mattered more than I realized. It also meant they were watching. Every upload. Every post. Every correlation I traced and exposed. Someone was reading them not to deny them, but to measure their threat. So I doubled the archive nodes. Added layers to my encryption. Stopped choosing search engines. Purged my local metadata. Switched from cloud to analog for anything I couldn't risk losing. I printed my own timeline. Pinned it on the wall. Drew red strings like I was living in a thriller, but it wasn't fiction. It was survival. People think paranoia is weakness. But in a system like this, paranoia is just informed intuition. The irony? The more I protected myself, the more I disappeared again. Not by their hand, by mine. Fewer calls. No texts. Friends stopped asking how the case was going. They wanted me to move on. Wanted me to find peace, which is the language people use when they mean make yourself smaller. But I couldn't go back to pretending. I'd seen the machine. And once you see it, pretending it's fair feels like betrayal. Not just of yourself, but of everyone else stuck inside it, still hoping it will save them. So I let go of the fantasy of vindication. I didn't need a ruling anymore. I needed exposure. Documentation that would outlive my body. Truth structured in such a way that even if they tried to redact it, the shape would remain. A shadow cast by what they refused to name. I stopped being a petitioner. I started being a historian. This wasn't a legal claim now. It was a chronicle. A memory engine. An artifact of resistance. I became fluent in a mission. I could spot a vanished case just by the way the docket jumped numbers. I could sense a rigged review panel from the tone of their public letters. When a system apologizes for delays with passive verbs, it's always hiding an action it doesn't want to name. I saw it all. And I was recording. Not for revenge. Not for compensation. For the archive. Because someone, someday, will ask, why didn't anyone do anything? And now there will be an answer, we did. They just didn't let you see it. Chapter 5. I used to want a verdict. Now I want a mirror. One big enough for the system to see itself. One that shows every denial in its true form, not an act of protocol, but a mechanism of disappearance. This isn't about a fall anymore. Or a claim. Or an attorney who vanished mid-case. It's about architecture. The kind you don't see unless you're forced underground. The kind designed not to stop you, but to exhaust you. Drain your hope until you agree to disappear yourself. But I didn't. And that made me dangerous. Because I stayed. I outlasted the polite shrugs, the procedural apologies, the forms that went nowhere. I kept the records. I tracked the silences. I mapped the contradictions. I built a topography of truth beneath their paperwork plateau. I didn't move on. I moved underneath. And now, I'm rising. Not as a litigant. As a ledger. A walking contradiction they can't redact. Because for every denial, I found a discrepancy. For every ghosted call, I logged a timestamp. For every witness ignored, I found a whisper. And now those whispers have started answering back. You see, when you survive long enough to tell the truth, you become a danger not because of what you say, but because you prove they failed to bury you. That's what this book is. Not a memoir. A breach. A testimony written in the voice they tried to delete. For the erased. For the flagged. For the ones who still check their inboxes even though they know no one's coming. You're not crazy. You're not alone. You're not wrong. You're just inconvenient. And they've built an entire profession around how to process inconvenient people. But not this time. This time, this story survives. My name is Bo Tiffany. And I am the record they didn't count on keeping itself.